We're going to take a look at Washington and Michigan national championship game and see where the matchup goes as far as the important metrics of the game, where we think that the game will be won and who has the advantage from a coach's perspective, and we'll dive right in. The way that we're going to do it is give a point for different statistical categories that we think are important for winning football games, and at the end just look at it and see who has more points and make a pick on the game. And right now the line from Las Vegas is 4.5 towards Michigan, so we do know that Michigan's favored, but of course all year that hasn't mattered to Washington. They found a way to win every single game. We're going to take a deep dive into the stats and matchups that we're going to see in the national championship game in Houston. First thing we're going to take a look at is head coaches. You got Kalen DeBoer for Washington, Jim Harbaugh for Michigan. Jim Harbaugh, unbelievable coach, been to Super Bowls, been to 3 different playoffs, really turned Michigan around. And Kalen DeBoer has won 3 national championships as a head coach at an NAIA school, Sioux Falls, and has an unbelievable record as a head coach. 2 really good coaches, I think 2 probably top 5 coaches in the NCAA right now. Harbaugh has more elite level experience, while Kalen DeBoer has more experience at a lower level in the NAIA. But as far as the head coaches that I'm going to go with Kalen DeBoer. Reason being, he's won national championships. Jim Harbaugh never has. He's been to Super Bowls, he's been to playoffs, but he's never won the national championship. So I'm going to go with Kalen DeBoer, and a point here for Washington as far as head coach is concerned. Next thing to look at is coaching staffs and just basically the coordinators overall and see who has the better coordinators. Of course, looking at Michigan, you got Sherrone Moore, who's been with Michigan for a while, and he's been the head coach for about 5-6 games this past year. Jesse Minter as their defense coordinator, maybe the best one in the country, has number 1 defense right now. 2 really high-level coordinators are going to be head coaches sooner rather than later. Looking at Washington, you got Ryan Grubb as the OC. Had a lot of interest last year, and of course has the number 1 passing offense in the country, and has been with Kalen DeBoer at a lot of different stops, even Sioux Falls. And William Inge, who doesn't have just the most talented defense, but he finds a way to get stops, create negative plays. Just like last week with Texas, had a great game plan to get hands up, knock down RPOs, and get Texas into long yard situations and finish drives and get Texas off the field just enough to get a win. So 2 really good coordinators for Washington and 2 really good coordinators for Michigan. But on this one, I just think Sherrone Moore, Jesse Minter are a little bit better as far as knowing their players and knowing who their team is, even though Ryan Grubb, William Inge are elite. I think Sherrone Moore, Jesse Minter are 2 of the best coordinators in the country. So a point right here for Michigan. Next thing we're going to take a look at is just talent composite, according to 24/7 Sports. And Michigan is the 14th overall team as far as talent composite with 2 5-stars, 45 4-stars, 38 3-stars, while Washington has a number 26 rated class with 0 5-stars, 27 4-stars, 49 3-stars. So I know that it doesn't look like a huge advantage as far as rosters, but talent composite from top to bottom, Michigan is number 14 in the country, Washington is 26. So the point right here goes to Michigan for talent composite based off of recruiting rankings. Of course, the next thing you're going to think about is the NFL draft and who's going to have more draft prospects, and especially high-end level draft prospects, which that's what we're looking for right here, is just elite guys, first day, second day type guys. And Washington is going to have quite a bit more. You got Penix, you got Odunze, even Braylon Trice on the D-line is a first-round type guy. And then O-tackle Troy Fatanu is right there as well, borderline first-round guy. I think he's going to really go up the draft boards after this playoff. And looking at Michigan, don't have just a ton of top-end talent. They do have defensive tackle. Chris Jenkins is probably going to be a first-round guy. And other than that, they got a lot of mid-level, 3rd, 4th-round type players. J.J. McCarthy, of course, is one of those guys that could be second-round type quarterback depending on how he throws the draft. But we're going to give the point to Washington on this one because a lot more high-level talent as far as the NFL draft this next year. Now we're going to look at 3 of the biggest spots as far as winning football games that most coaches focus on, and turnover margin. So that's what we're going to look at for Washington and Michigan. And Washington, they've thrown 7 interceptions. Obviously, they throw the football a whole lot, so 7 interceptions is really good as far as the amount of throws they've had, and they've had 7 fumbles as well. That's quite a bit. So right there, obviously, ball security is really huge right there as far as the fumbles. Their defense has forced 4 fumbles, and they've also collected 16 INTs. So right there, that's 20 total. So on that, Washington is +4 as far as the turnover margin is concerned. They obviously forced 2 big fumbles last week against Texas. They really turned the game. But if you're looking at Michigan, they're number 2 in the country in turnover margin. They're +17. So they've only fumbled the ball 3 times and lost it, and they've had 5 INTs thrown by the quarterbacks. They've forced 9 fumbles and had 16 interceptions as well. So you think about that. Both teams have forced 16 interceptions, but Michigan has forced 9 fumbles and given up the ball 6 times less. So right here, Michigan, number 2 team in the country in turnover margin, is going to get the point right here. just looked at turnover margin, which is huge as far as winning games. Next thing to think about is red zone goal line and who scores touchdowns at the red zone goal line and who keeps the other team from scoring touchdowns. So looking at Washington's offense, they're scoring touchdowns on 68% of their attempts in the red zone, while Michigan is scoring at 73. So right there, a 73 to 68 advantage for the offense of Michigan as opposed to offensive Washington as far as scoring touchdowns. Defensively, Michigan's only giving up 43%, while Washington's giving up 70% touchdowns on red zone trips. So huge advantage right here. Red zone goal line goes to Michigan. When you're scoring touchdowns, other teams are getting held to field goals. That turns to a huge advantage, especially if Michigan controls the game in the line of scrimmage, able to hold on to the football a little bit more than what Washington is used to. Those trips are going to be vital if they score touchdowns when they have a chance in the red zone. And Michigan's defense is better statistically, and so is Michigan's offense. So we're going to have to lean with Michigan right here on this one for red zone goal line advantage. Next critical factor we're going to look at is third and fourth down offense and defense. So Michigan converts on third down 44.8%, while Washington converts at 46.8%. So just about 2% difference right there. Washington's offense is better on third downs. On fourth downs, though, Michigan's actually 81%, and we saw in the semifinal, Michigan go for fourth down 2 times in critical situations and end up getting it. That led to touchdowns and basically led to winning the football game. So that was huge in the last game. They converted on 81%, and they've done it more times than Washington has, 17 to, I think, 13 or 14. And Washington is only converting at 70.6%, so just a little bit less. Two really good teams as far as third and fourth down conversions. But Michigan statistically a little bit better right there on offense. And then looking at defense, Washington is giving up 40% on third down, while Michigan is giving up 30%. So huge advantage right there, 10% advantage towards Michigan's defense. And on fourth down as well, Washington's giving up 41.7%, while Michigan's only giving up 31%. So again, 10% advantage for Michigan's defense on third and fourth down. So as far as getting a point right here, we're going to have to lean with the defense of Michigan and also a better fourth down conversion percentage there as well. So Michigan had 3 out of 4 statistical advantages right here, while Washington just had 1. That was third down, just a 2% advantage for Washington. So point right here goes to Michigan. Next thing we're going to look at is explosive plays. And if you win turnover margin, you win the red zone goal line, and you win explosive plays, you're going to win every single game. And on this one, who's the most explosive team? Very obvious. Washington is the most explosive team. They have probably the best receiving core and quarterback combination since the 2019 LSU team. Really elite on the outside, elite at quarterback. So obviously the most explosive team on the field is going to be Washington, and explosive plays can negate a lot of those advantages you have as far as turnover margin, red zone goal line. If you're not getting a red zone goal line, you're scoring from 30, 40 yards out. It doesn't matter if they're better than the red zone goal line. So right here, obvious big point right here for Washington on explosive plays. Next big factor to look at is the quarterback comparison. And 2 really good quarterbacks, 2 guys that are just straight winners. J.J. McCarthy only lost 1 game. One of the best winning percentages in college football history for J.J. McCarthy. Really came up clutch when he needed to against Alabama in the semifinals. And you think about Michael Penix, leading the country in passing. He's unreal. He's the best deep ball thrower I've ever seen. And, of course, he has guys on the outside that really make plays for him as well. But he's elite as far as moving in the pocket, finding ways, and then also understanding the offense, getting it out to his hots, making the defense wrong anytime they try to blitz. So 2 really good quarterbacks, but Penix is probably the best quarterback in college football. Of course, Jaden Daniels has something to say about that, but the most accurate deep ball thrower I've ever seen, and also just great movement, great anticipation to get the ball out. Penix, one of the best that I've ever seen to do it in college football. So kind of give Washington a point right here for an advantage at quarterback. Now a quick look just at offense overall. Of course, Michigan is at number 70. Totally different offense. They're not trying to go fast. They're trying to control the clock, run the football, shorten the game, play really good defense. So totally different mindset as far as the Washington offense. Washington's offense is number 10 overall, number 1 in passing. So they're going to sling the ball around. They do control the ball. Like we saw in the game against Texas, they will control the ball, control the clock. They just do it in a different way. But, of course, right here, the point statistically goes to Washington. Great players on the outside. Joe Moore winning O-line. So right here, you're going to have to give a point to Washington. Again, this one is just 2 different styles. And Washington's offense statistically is a lot better than Michigan's. So right here, to tie it up 5-5 as far as points, going to give a point to Washington's offense. Overall, a little bit better than Michigan's offense, but both of them really elite at what they do. Of course, if you look at the offense, you can look at defense, and this one's not hard either. You got a really talented defense with Michigan at number 1 in the country. Haven't played just a ton of great offenses, but we saw last week how they were able to keep Alabama from creating explosive plays, whether it was with Milroe's legs or the deep passes that Milroe was so good at through the year. They were able to limit those explosive plays, which was huge. And Washington's defense is 94 overall, very opportunistic, made plays when they needed to, but just statistically not nearly as good as Michigan. They played a lot better offense, obviously, in the Pac-12 than in the Big Ten. But the point here obviously has to go to Michigan. And you just think about how they were able to keep Alabama from creating explosive plays. If they can do that same thing against Washington, it's going to be really hard for Washington to stay in the game. They're going to have to create explosive plays, win their one-on-ones on the outside to stay in this game and control the football. But on this obvious point here from Michigan's defense, much more talented unit and had a much better statistical advantage overall this season. Third part of the game that was awful for both of these teams last week is special teams. So Michigan, they muffed 2 punts. One nearly cost them the football game. One of them led to a touchdown for Alabama, while Washington muffed a punt that was recovered by Texas that led to a touchdown for Texas. So both teams basically give up touchdowns to the other team on punt returns. But the advantage here is that Washington had a kicker that is kicking with confidence, putting it through the uprights, while Michigan missed 2 kicks, missed a deep field goal, and then had an extra point that was messed up as far as the snap and the hold and everything right there. So 2 times the field goal unit was sent out there, and they did not convert. So right there, I'd say they're a little bit less confident than the Washington extra point field goal team. So I'm going to have to get the point right here for Washington just based off of the confidence that their kicker has and that unit. And this obviously was a huge factor in the semifinal game. Could be a big factor in this game as well. Now we're going to look at some different matchups as far as units, and we're going to look at Washington's O-line versus Michigan's D-line. This is a really good matchup. Joe Moore winning, offensive line, only giving up 11 sacks all year. Obviously, with how much they pass the ball, that's 0.78 sacks a game or something along those lines. So unbelievable pass pro, and that obviously is with Penix as well. He's not holding the football. If you put Jalen Milroe back there, obviously he's going to get sacked a lot more just because he holds on the football, different way of playing the game. This O-line's also been able to run the ball against some good defenses. Looking at Michigan's defensive line, obviously you got some really good players up there. You got a guy that's borderline first-round D tackle. They've done a great job getting after the quarterback and also stopping the run. But whenever you only give up 11 sacks, it's harder to manufacture a pass rush, especially whenever the quarterback is on the same page as the O-line, knowing where your hots are, getting the ball out quickly. Just on this one, we have to give the advantage to Washington's offensive line. I think they're going to be able to keep Michael Penix upright just as they have all year, even though Michigan's D-line is pretty good. They did a great job condensing the pocket against Jalen Milroe. Just a totally different animal with the O-line from Washington and their pass pro, and also keeping them off balance with the run game, doing just enough to keep them from just pinning their ears back and pass rushing every single play. So right here, we're going to give the point to Washington's offensive line against Michigan's defensive line. Then we're going to look at Michigan's O-line versus Washington's defensive line. And a lot of people kind of wondering why Michigan's offensive line wasn't up for the Joe Moore Award. They weren't in the top 3, but they had won it the previous 2 years. So whenever you're looking at why teams win, and you got the 3 past Joe Moore as far as the best offensive line units in the country in this game, is very obvious. Whenever you win up front, especially on the offensive side, you got a good chance to win every single game. That's what both these teams have done. Washington's D-line has been susceptible to the run. They gave up quite a few yards, especially yards per rush last week against Texas. And Michigan has one of the better offensive lines in the country. So you're going to have to lean with Michigan right here on this one. As far as their offensive line is going to have advantage against Washington's defensive line. They're going to be able to move them around a little bit, and I think they're going to be able to control the game, control the clock with their run game. Obviously, lean on them a little bit more than they did against Alabama. So on this one, we're going to have to give the point to Michigan and their offensive line over Washington's defensive line. Next matchup, just looking at the wide receivers and skill players, and you're looking at Washington, which probably has the most complete wide receiver core, size, speed that's been out there since LSU in 2019. When you think about Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase on that LSU team, you got Odunze, you got Polk, you got just plethora of guys out there that are making plays. So they're really good outside. Their running back, obviously a little bit banged up, so we'll talk about that later, but really good skill guys for Washington. Michigan's really solid as well. I mean, you got Roman Wilson, who's their guy on the outside, made great plays, huge plays in their semifinal game to find a way to win. And then Loveland at tight end is solid, man. He's a good football player. Does a good job blocking. He's not just the most physical guy, but he gets the job done against bigger bodies, especially against Alabama. Those guys that he was having to take on were absolute dogs, and he held his own. And obviously the running backs for Michigan, you got 2 of the better players in the country as far as Corum and Donovan Edwards. Those are 2 really good football players, much different as far as their styles. Edwards a little bit more in space, Corum right there in the box. But as far as the point right here, Washington's receivers are just so elite. Going to have to lean with the wide receiver skill players for Washington over the skill guys from Michigan. And right here, obviously, it's a tight matchup. You got 8 points for Washington, 7 for Michigan right now. Looking at the defensive skill players, linebackers, Washington has been injured all year, so their statistics are not nearly as good as they could be, but Michigan's obviously elite. I mean, their defense is number one in the country for a reason. You can't get there unless you got great guys on the back end, not give up big plays and get guys on the ground. So obviously right here with the just statistical advantage defensively, Michigan's going to have the advantage here and get a point with the better DBs and linebackers in this matchup. All right, another huge factor in this game and big factor for winning in the fourth quarter is who can run the football, put the game away, hold on to it when they need to. And when you're looking at both offenses, both of them are pretty solid. So Washington is averaging 123.6. Don't run the ball nearly as much as what Michigan does. Michigan's averaging 159.5 per game. So that's total yards per game. If you're looking at yards per rush, which I think is more important here, Washington has an advantage here at 4.42 yards per rush to Michigan's 4.25. So that's over the entire course of the year. Washington's averaging about 0.17 yards per rush more, which is not huge. But with how Washington runs it so much less, if they can run it for about 5 yards or 4.5 yards a pop against this defense, it's going to be huge. And they do a good job spreading the field, making guys go sideline to sideline. And Michigan, if you're looking at how they're going to play, they're going to play more of a too-high look, especially against the way that Washington likes to throw the football. So probably going to be a little bit better box to run it at. So right here, statistically, we're looking at yards per rush and giving the advantage to Washington over Michigan, who would have been the advantage here if you're just looking at yards per game. Now looking at the defensive run rankings, Washington is ranked number 41, giving them 137.1 per game, 4.4 per rush. So they're rushing at 4.4, but they're also giving up 4.4 per rush, which is not the worst thing in the world, but it's just one of those things. Whenever you're getting up 4+ yards, it's quite a bit more. Whenever you're looking at the number 8 team in the country, that's only giving up 93.1 yards per game, which is unreal, giving up less than 100 yards. They're number 8 in the country. And then, of course, when that's said, they're also only giving up 3.03 yards per rush. So giving up 1 yard less per rush, which is huge. And that's a big-time statistical advantage for Michigan's defense over Washington's defense as far as stopping the run. So a point right here goes to Michigan's defense as far as stopping the run. So big point right here for Michigan's defense. Now just looking at the offensive rankings as far as passing game. And Washington's obviously number one in the country. They throw it around a lot more than Michigan does. They pass for 350 a game compared to 218 a game for Michigan. But really just looking at per completion, Washington is at 14.04 while Michigan's at 12.26. So about 1.8 yards more per completion. Then obviously if you're looking at per attempt, Washington's also completing 9.37 compared to the 8.96 from Michigan. So right there, about a 0.4 yards per attempt better for Washington. So if you're looking at any of the categories as far as passing, Washington is a little bit better. Obviously, they do it a lot more, so yards per game is probably not the one that you want to look at. You just want to look at per completion, and Washington is still better. Over 14 yards per completion is really good, and that goes back to having explosive receivers, and Penix probably the best deep ball thrower in the country. So a point right here for Washington as far as pass offense. Now looking at passing defense, and Washington is number 120 in the country as far as yards per game given up. Obviously, seeing some really good offenses that like to throw the ball around the Pac-12, giving up 267 yards per game. But then looking at just the other stats, you got 13.35 yards per completion for Washington that's given up and 10.4 per completion for Michigan. So about a 3-yard advantage here on this one, which is very substantial. And then you're looking at per attempt, 6.63 per attempt for Washington, which is really good. They're getting a lot of incompletions. So if you're looking at the difference between 13.35 per completion and then 6.6 per attempt is huge. So they cut the yards in half based off of incompletions. So they're forcing a lot of incompletions, tight windows, knocking the ball down. But when there are completions, they're big plays right there. Averaging 13.35 is really big. And then if you're looking at yards per attempt, Michigan is giving up 5.77, which is unreal compared to the 6.63 of Washington. So both these teams do a really good job of not allowing completions. So that nearly cuts the yards per attempt and per completion in half. So what that tells me is these guys create tight windows. Both of them are pretty good at knocking the ball down. Right here, statistical advantages go to Michigan. And, of course, we've already talked about it, but they've not played nearly the offenses that Washington has. And Washington comes up clutch whenever they need to on the back end. But right here, point goes to Michigan. Next thing we're going to look at is the pass rush versus sacks allowed. Now, Washington has only given up 11 total sacks. With how much they throw the ball, that's unreal, 0.79 per game. And that's a testament to Penix knowing exactly where the hots are, getting the ball out, and the wide receivers, quarterback being on the same line with the offensive line. So to me, that's having an elite quarterback, elite coaches, able to mirror that up. Now, Michigan's not bad either. They're number 19. They've only given up 19 sacks, which is 1.36 per game, compared to the 0.79 per game to Washington. So both really elite. They do it different ways. Michigan, of course, using more tight ends, fullbacks, help out with the protection, with play actions and stuff, but they still get sacked. Nearly a half sack more per game than what Washington does. Now, looking at the defensive side, Washington's only sacked the quarterback 21 times, which is 1.5 per game, which is not very good, especially with how much the Pac-12 throws. So they're not just getting just a ton of pass rush, but you're looking at Michigan. They sacked the quarterback 38 times, which is 2.71 per game, so that's 1.2 more sacks per game than what Washington has. So that's a huge statistical advantage for Michigan. But if you're having to give it to who I think is going to be able to control it, I'm going to have to go with the offense of Washington. And the reason being is it's really hard to manufacture a pass rush, especially whenever you have a quarterback that gets the ball out quickly. That's going to get into the legs of Michigan. And, of course, I know you guys are going to say, hey, they had 6 sacks last week against Alabama, and that's 100% true. But totally different animal here as far as how you're going to have to do that. Last week, Milroe held on the ball, had to condense the pocket, push everything back into him. They did a great job with that. But right here, you have to manufacture your pass rush, get to him quickly. I just don't think that pass rush is something that Michigan is elite at. But I do know that Washington's elite at getting the ball out, protecting the quarterback. So right here, I'm going to give the advantage as far as pass rush and pass protection to Washington. Next thing to look at is just the health. And of course, this national championship game is going to happen a week after their semifinals. So right here, not a ton of time to heal up. Of course, you have the running back from Washington that went down late in the game in that last drive trying to get a first down. And everybody's saying he's going to be ready, but whenever you're getting pulled off the field, not able to get up, I think that's going to be hard to come back from and be full speed. You're looking at Michigan, obviously they had their O-lineman, probably the best O-lineman they have that went down against Ohio State. So a couple injuries here, going to be big for both offenses. But Michigan's had a lot of time to adjust to a new offensive line, while Washington hasn't. So as far as the injuries, Washington's, I think, is going to be a little bit more impactful if the running back is hobbled up, not able to go. So right here, I'm going to have to give the advantage to Michigan on this one. Last thing we want to look at is just intangibles. Now, there's not just a ton of intangibles. You're thinking about the games in Houston. That's far for both teams, but both of them are going to have to travel down there with a week's notice. The only other thing I can think of is Harbaugh, kind of the noise around him possibly going to the NFL. That could be a distraction, but both of these teams are senior-laden. I don't think there's going to be a ton of distractions. I think both of them are coming in focused. So right here, I can't find an advantage as far as the intangibles, so I'm not going to really award a point right here. Two veteran-heavy teams are going to come in ready to play and come in focused, and they're going to play their best game of the season in the national championship game, so it's going to be a heck of a matchup. So as we're looking at right here, it is 11-11. So as far as the stats that I think are important, somehow we came back, and I know there were some very subjective picks right here, but whenever I was looking at it, I wasn't trying to make it 11-11. It just so happens that that's how it played out, but I have to make a pick on this game. Now, the line is Michigan by 4.5, and trust me, I think both teams are really good. I could see either team winning this game. But whenever you look at the stats and the things that coaches look at as far as winning games, is a huge advantage for Michigan. So Michigan is better in turnover margin this year. They're better in red zone goal line. They're better in third and fourth down. The only thing as far as the top 4 stats that I think win football games that Washington had advantage was explosive plays. Now, explosive plays can make all this stuff go away as far as red zone goal line, third down, all that. That's why it's such a tough pick. Washington can create explosive plays. But on this one, I'm going to lean Michigan because of the number of statistics that are important that lean towards Michigan, and also the way that they were able to keep Alabama, who was the most explosive offense they've seen all year, from creating big plays down the field. And also they were able to contain Jalen Milroe, which I really didn't think they were going to be able to do. But right here on this one, picking Michigan because they have a lot more key areas that I think they're better at than Washington. Picking Michigan to win and picking Michigan to cover because it's a 4.5 line. I think they're going to win by a touchdown. They're going to control the line of scrimmage. They're going to control the pace of the game, total on the football, not give up big plays. So right here on this one, leaning with Michigan to win the national championship, first one since '98. But let us know where we missed, where we were wrong, and we'll see you guys again in the next one.